What's up, everybody? This is Will. Just a couple of quick notes before we hop into this episode of the podcast. I want to remind everybody that you can certainly leave a review of the podcast if you're enjoying it on your favorite podcast player app, or you can leave one directly on our website, podcast.lovablesurvivor.com. All the ratings and reviews really do help the show grow, and we'd really appreciate it. Also, if you're interested in learning more about the community that we're building, you can go sign up for updates and details at vip.survivorscience.com. And without further ado, let's hop into this week's episode. Good morning, everybody. My name is Will Schmier, and welcome back to another episode of the Lovable Survivor podcast. Today, in episode 13, we're going to talk about gatekeeping information. Now, this sounds like a weird topic, but let me preface. I think there is a very big disconnect when it comes to the medical, scientific, and stroke survivor community. And what I mean is that there are sort of different lanes. So there are researchers, clinicians, survivors, caregivers, caretakers, family, all these different lanes. They all play a role and they're all a little different. But I think the issue is a lot of them don't seem to talk to one another. Researchers research because that's where the money is in the science. Clinicians are the ones who are drawn to helping people get better. They are, the ones, so to say, on the ground level. They're the ones implementing all the research, all the tools for the survivors. And what's tricky is I don't think this is happening necessarily intentionally. I just think it's what happens. And I think, I know. The reason it happens is because people, like every facet of life, people get very involved in their world, right? They get involved in the work that they're doing. They don't unintentionally try to keep people out of the loop. It's just researchers and, they get into this world. They're doing the work. They're doing the science. They're digging in. They're finding different things. They're testing different things. They're that whole scientific process. They're going through their hypothesis. They're trying to connect the dots, and they're trying to do so on behalf of clinicians and survivors, because ultimately they want to help those people. I think what happens is so many times, and it's weird. I don't know if it's because of money, if it's because of the actual science. Like I get it. I understand. If you are working in something similar, whether it's, cancer, stroke, they're different fields, and there are things that we have, problems that we haven't yet solved in these fields, right? Nobody has solved the cure for cancer or any cancer, really. But there could be, right? So I understand some of the gatekeeping in that regard, because if somebody were to be sitting upon the answer to curing cancer, of course, that's going to be the biggest deal ever. And I'm not trying to make light of that. I understand why that might be kept under lock and key for a while. That's going to be a big deal. It is a big deal. And it should be kept under lock and key. What I'm talking about is more of the everyday sort of scientific and just regular old information. And what brought this upon me, what brought this up for me this week is that in doing research for the show, I've been going down these rabbit holes, and I keep finding that as somebody who is pretty involved in his recovery. And not only for myself, but the driver behind this podcast is wanting to help other survivors get the information that I wish I had found earlier, sooner. I don't know that you can necessarily do something with that always, but like going through this process is not easy. I've said that ad nauseum. I think there are things that I've heard. There are things that I've heard in passing. There are things that I wish people stopped and said a little more firmly so that I could like either make a note myself or have somebody else make a note to circle back to it. Because you do get overwhelmed as a survivor with the amount of information coming your way. Sometimes it can be overwhelming to bring on yourself. Sometimes you might just not physically or mentally be ready to receive the information. It doesn't mean it's not good information. It means you're just simply not in a spot to utilize that. I think, again, it's something I've observed in the last couple of weeks, whether it's the research that I've been doing on my own or for this show. I am still very much actively in recovery myself. I am in therapy this year. Again, physical therapy, occupational therapy. I really love therapy and the way the healthcare system is set up here in the US. Most insurance companies typically only give you X amount of visits per year, which is weird because I pay a shit ton of money out of pocket for myself and my family for the insurance. And yeah, I mean, I've gotten my money's worth over the last couple of years and continue to get my money's worth. So I'm complaining a little, but it just seems odd that I can't just keep doing the work to get better. Because if I could, then I wouldn't be going or relying on insurance as much long term. But I don't think this show is about healthcare in general. And I don't think it really behooves us to get too far down that rabbit hole. I just think it's interesting sometimes. So let's not go too far down that path. But again, really what I'm talking about is beyond health insurance and things. Again, going back to that gatekeeping of information, I understand it to some degree because people are developing methods and tools, and they certainly should be able to protect their if you develop something, you should be able to protect it and you should be able to profit off it. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is some of the literature, some of the, what really brought this upon me, brought this to the forefront of my mind this week is that, I'm continuing to read the book that I mentioned last time, Hope After Stroke for Caregivers and Survivors, the holistic guide to getting your life back. And again, what brought this to sort of the forefront for me was that in the book, chapter 9, I believe on Kindle, this is a chapter on the typical, like, getting back to walking and how that's one of the big things. A lot of us as survivors who have walking affected, it's one of the biggest things to gaining your independence back. And I know it was for me, going from standing at 6'8" and walking to being in a wheelchair. Obviously, for me, walking was super important, and it's something that was a major thing that I wanted back almost immediately. It was the number one thing for me. That being said, I was surprised by something I read in chapter 9, which now I may have heard about these throughout the process. I've read some of the books, but this topic of neuroplasticity and the brain rewiring itself, I haven't dove too much into that on this show. I think it requires a much larger discussion, but neuroplasticity is something that's always on my mind because I am in year 3 of my recovery, and my brain, for me, I continuously work because I'm not giving up. Like, I am hell-bent on doing the absolute most and best I can. Now, I was starting at a different place than other survivors. I had a lot of underlying conditions that came to light at the time of my stroke. So I realized even today, my recovery journey has been a little bit longer than some. It could be for a number of reasons, but I know for sure it is definitely because I had a number of other issues that I don't really talk about, because I never thought I'd be the guy to be talking about this stuff, period. I was never, I don't talk about this to be making excuses. I really talk about stroke now from the perspective of I've been through a shit ton the last couple of years. And I really, if I can help other people not only avoid this or escape it, I would love to, because I wouldn't have, I think most survivors can agree to, and it may depend on the level of what you go through, but a stroke is really, I mean, this is going to sound corny. A stroke is no joke. It is a big fucking deal. It is something that is going to change your life profoundly. If you're lucky and do not have a lot of long-term residual deficits, if you're in that 10%, which I don't even know if it's a real stat, to be honest, in that 10% that fully recover, God, I'm ecstatic for you. I want you to win. I want survivors who are wanting to do the work to absolutely get back to life as they know it and want it. And sometimes, a little aside here is like, maybe when you have a stroke, if you go through that stroke, I love the idea of a second chance, because it's like you can take that time to sort of reassess, like, okay, maybe I made these decisions that I didn't like. And now I have the ability to make choices that are more aligned with my long-term goals. I'm lucky in that regard that it happened at 37. I mean, it's not my favorite thing to do, but I'm able to go now. I have to rebuild myself and my life, and I'm able to make different choices. And not everybody gets that time or that choice, or, it's hard. I mean, I think obviously it's not ideal. I'd certainly rather never have had the stroke, but I think I've learned some valuable lessons as a result of having my stroke. And that's why this podcast, it's taken me a couple of years to get into this. And again, that's only because I never wanted to be the guy that was known as the stroke survivor. I really, as big as I am and as much of a personality as I am to my friends and family, I would have rather just been the big guy that makes jokes and, it's fun to be around and has fun with his family and it just, does all these things. But here we are, now I'm a stroke survivor. But again, going back to some of this stuff, I know, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place today. I've been on a few phone calls before I recorded. But, so the thing that came up with gatekeeping, and the reason I bring this topic up is because in that book, Hope After Stroke, chapter 9, she talks about principles of neuroplasticity. And this is what really gets me fired up and why I'm so fired up for this episode of the podcast. This drives me crazy. I'm just going to read this sentence. 2 types of physical therapy you will not see in U.S. hospitals, but are worthy of your time and investigation. Based on the principles of neuroplasticity. Now, to be fair, I don't think this is necessarily 100% accurate, just because times have changed. This book was written in 2019. The copy I have is dated 2019. But I got to tell you, neuroplasticity is a real thing. That is a real proven thing, right? We know the brain is capable of, honestly, more than we know. We know very little about the brain compared to what we know about so many other topics. So I think to just dismiss neuroplasticity is insane. And I'll tell you firsthand, I know the brain rewires itself, because how do you go from hating running your whole life for 39 years and 10 months to going all that time to 200 days in a row of running 5 miles at a minimum for 200 days after having a stroke, after being diagnosed with MS? How does my brain just suddenly decide, you know what? Now is a good time to start running. So if you were on the fence about neuroplasticity and don't think the brain can rewire itself at any point, let me just be the first to tell you, it absolutely can. However, I've read some of these other books, and I guess I didn't pay that much of attention when I read Norman Doidge's book. But again, this statement that 2 types of physical therapy that you will not hear about in the US. Who's in charge? I want to talk to who's in fucking charge, because why am I not hearing about this from any medical professionals at all? Like, I believe I've heard about these. So there's 2 methods. The Feldenkrais method, which was developed in the 1950s by Feldenkrais, and then the second is the brain's way of healing. No, sorry. That was a book by Norman Doidge, which I read ish, but it was very early on. And then Anat Manuel method of neural movement, which is a kind of a take on Feldenkrais. But like, honestly, how nobody's even mentioned these 2 things to me. I'm a pretty active stroke survivor in the community. And like, I'm not blaming anybody, but like, you know, I'm lucky and fortunate to be, kind of in touch with one of the major medical networks in Southeast US, certainly in Florida, one of the best stroke recovery programs and facilities in the nation. And now, to be fair to everybody, somebody probably mentioned these at some point along the way. And I'm not saying either of these 2 methods are something that doesn't innately speak to me. I do have to do a little bit more research before I talk extensively about them. But, both of them seem like principles and methods that I've sort of adopted and adapted to. And like I said, maybe I've heard of them, and maybe somebody mentioned them along the way, and maybe I did some research, but I just, and I know Dr. Jill Bolt, who's the neuroscientist that also wrote a book. She also had a stroke, so I know she doesn't endorse these, but she's kind of a fan of them, and that's reaffirmed by this book. But I just feel like, again, I love my team. My team is my team. I mean, my stroke recovery team is my ride or die. I mean, like, if I can't work with my therapist, physical therapist, or occupational therapist, I don't want to go to therapy that week. If they're off, I'm off. It astounds me that I'm finding things out well into year 3. Again, I don't blame my therapist team, because they're just giving me exercises. We're working on stuff. We're doing the day to day. We're trying to improve, But again, back to the gatekeeping of information. Even the World Stroke Organization. I mean, World Stroke is great, right? They sort of ask for a donation and they give you access to some of this information. They're pretty open, to be fair. I don't mind giving a donation. I don't mind paying money for things. Like, I just want, when I talk about gatekeeping, it's not that people shouldn't get money for the work that they've done or the research they've scoured or the things they put together. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, like, just to read a sentence where there are methods that are available and something to explore, but people won't even talk about them. Like, that just, I'm going to lose my fucking mind. Like, that should not be a thing that's happening in 2023. The world is a very much more globalized than, say, in the 90s, right? 30 years ago, like, WordPress, something I worked in the development field for years, democratized publishing. Before then, everything was like, it was just much harder. And I feel like information for the survivors that want it. Like I was just joking with a friend, a real good friend. I was like, I have to pay $500 to get access to a medical journal on stroke. Like, shouldn't you get one free? Like, shouldn't you get a year free subscription with your stroke? Like, I mean, is that too much to ask for? Who are like, what are people doing with this information? Thousands of dollars are being exchanged for companies to do this research and get the research. And then like the people that really need it don't even have access. Not only don't have access, it's extreme. I mean, I'm in a different position. I think some people can afford it, but like the access is so limited that it's not even like payment isn't even a question or an option because people don't even know about these things. It's unbelievable to me. I know I'm going down a big rabbit hole and I'm on a soapbox right now, but I feel like that is sort of the purpose of this podcast because there weren't a lot of resources when I first had my stroke. And honestly, like, again, I sound a little like an ass, but like, I just want the information. I just want to know where I can get it. Can I get access to it? Can I pay for it? I'm happy to pay for anybody's time and their research and their like. It's just frustrating to be a survivor and find out. The more I dig, the more I find out, the more I realize that I don't know. And I'm not saying this to be arrogant. I'm just saying if I'm having trouble finding this information, and it's good information, it's things that I could use, it's tips, it's tricks, it's things that might work for me, right? Because every survivor is living a different journey. And that's because every brain is different. So you don't know necessarily what works. I mean, I would be okay with like chunks of things like this works for this group of people, this works for this group of people, and this works for this group. But you might want to try one of the other ones if you're finding something doesn't work. Like I don't need exact answers. I'm willing to do the work and put in the time. I just need to be able to find it from the research. I need to be spoken to by clinicians and people in the field who really are hearing these things. I just want to be, I don't, just tell me what's available. I mean, I'm not even asking you to do the work. I'm asking you to just share information and pass things along. And I don't think I'm alone in this. And I think it just speaks to why there needs to be these online communities. I think it needs to be off of platforms like Facebook. I came across there's a group of like 8,000 stroke survivors on Facebook. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. If it's working for people, great. Like, I think there are different levels. There are going to be people who just kind of want information and a little bit of access. And they're going to go the DIY method. Like probably I would do it myself. So I just want the information. Then there's people who are going to want accountability, so there might be an extra tier. And then there's people that want a full hands-on experience. And it's just amazing to me, to find new methods and I know things are developed over time and there's always going to be new things that come out, but like, just, honestly, I don't even know if the Christ method or the Daniel methods would work for me or if it's something I'd enjoy, but certainly like to give it a shot. And I think again that I don't know. It's one of the things that annoys me being a survivor is that there's, I do think even if you had all this info on day one, it'd be overwhelming. But again, this nobody's going to solve the healthcare problems in America. But I just feel like, like even something as simple as this book that I've been mentioning the last podcast and today here in episode 13 is that like, how am I buying tons of stuff from Amazon, right? They're looking to sell me everything and anything. I would read every book on stroke that is available to me as a survivor. Every tool, everything at my disposal. I mean, I've been, and maybe I hadn't really been scouring the last year or so on stroke specific books because I was working on other things. Fair, but again, finding this book in the last couple weeks, and then just to be in year 3 and just finding it out now that this book not only exists but is also an excellent. I wouldn't say it's like a playbook for stroke recovery, but it's got to be the most comprehensive book I've seen available, at least to kind of start if you were going to game plan for your recovery. It would be a great starting point. I don't know why more people aren't talking about this book. Like it honestly, I'm baffled. I don't have a better thing to say about it other than I'm baffled. I think the only reason I haven't finished this book yet is because I'm just I'm reading and rereading chapters. Like in the same chapter, this is not going to be a podcast about this book every week, but I'm finding stuff out and I want to bring it to you, and I want to remind you to go check out this book and give it a read if you're feeling like not lost, but like just looking for some more things. And I just love the kind of collaborative approach, and that's why I'm so mad about the gatekeeping. I think people that are making content, whether it's a podcast, whether it's YouTube, whether you're selling courses, like, everybody's got a take. And I do believe there are different things that work for different people. I feel like the best way for people to make an informed decision of any kind is to have the information and then make the choice. And that first choice doesn't align with you, or the thing doesn't work for you, you go on to choice 2. Like that. This is common sense to me. And I feel like in the end, it works out for everybody's best interests and works out for the betterment of everyone. They have information to make informed choices. And I know we're already going kind of long in this episode, and this is not directly tied to the Feldenkrais or Nat Manual methods, but in that same chapter, they talk about the Brunstrom approach. I keep messing up. Sorry, I'm getting tired. And this is a big thing in therapy too, is that some therapists feel, it's okay. I don't mind that people have different approaches. I just feel like as a survivor, I want to, again, know my options, and I want to know, I think therapists and clinicians, they have everybody's safety. They always have safety in mind. I'm not arguing that. I'm not even, safety is obviously number one. I think that it goes without saying. But the approach may vary from person to person, and it may be different from person to person, because everybody's stroke not only is different, but everybody is living a different life. Not every stroke survivor is under the age of 40. Not every stroke survivor is, a parent of younger children. So I think this, and part of the Brunstrom approach is really like, what that is if you're not familiar, is like compound movements to regain ability versus constraining movements to regain ability. So it's kind of like if you're right side affected, really focusing on the right hand and using the right hand only. I feel like walking in really everyday life is more of a compound movement. I understand both approaches. I just feel like, and I don't think this is kept the same as as I was talking about earlier. I think this is just sometimes comes down to facility's personal preference. It comes down to therapist preferences. I'm not sure I really feel one versus the other is better. I feel like mixing both is honestly ideal, because I feel like you need to have that. You don't need anything, but if you're somebody who has children and is living a little bit more of an active lifestyle, you might need compound movements to do certain things. My only caution there is that, sometimes and I think I've learned this firsthand, is that when you overcompensate too long, um, you kind of can develop bad habits. And I don't know. I could see both sides here. I think sometimes I like with typing. I'll just go back to that example. I can peck the keyboard to death now. Would I rather go back to ASDF home row deal and just in hindsight, yeah, I think if I practiced typing 10 minutes a day for the last 3 years, I think I'd be further along. But I didn't know that when I started. Sometimes you think things are going to work out because honestly, sometimes things just start working out. Like I talked about that last week too. Is like handwriting wasn't a big thing that I was worried about necessarily getting back to initially. There were other bigger things that were on the forefront of my mind. And then as bigger sort of tasks or abilities were regained, I've started refining that list. And, you can only do so much. You have to be willing to also be okay with your choices and the choices that you made along the way. So I think that's important. Obviously hindsight. Yeah, of course, if I spent 10 minutes doing the top 10 tasks every day for 3 years, yeah, I might be further along, but who knows? It's really not a big deal. It's just something to keep in mind and consider when you're evaluating yourself, or if you're the caregiver, caretaker, or you're just a family member. I think just that constant evaluation is really important. Because, sometimes you have to also weigh in other things. Like I do believe in the use it or lose it. But again, it's hard to know when to start, because if something is really impossible in the beginning, like in the very beginning of my stroke, I couldn't open my right hand at all. So like there was really no point in trying to use it because it wasn't doing anything. And that changed over time. So use it or lose it, it's a thing. But I also think you have to be just again, goes back to be awareness and sort of reassessing on a regular basis and not letting too much time go by without retesting yourself and saying, hey, is this better? Am I walking better? Not perfect, just better. Am I able to open my right hand? Okay, well, maybe it is time for some right-handed exercises. And the other thing, I hate the phrase fake it till you make it, but I think sometimes when it comes to stroke and stroke recovery, I think it's important because it sort of gets you in that mindset of at least starting to think you can do things. I'm not a big visualization guy. I'm not into the woo-woo stuff much, but I do think there is some validity in visualization of certain things. Like I do a lot with like a lot of air things. Again, sometimes like I dribble a basketball, but without an actual basketball. Handwriting is something I'm still working on. Typing, I'll be running in the neighborhood and I'll be like moving my fingers like I look like a lunatic, but I don't really care. Just getting those movements and those little things in place, because sometimes, it can, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it works for everybody. It's sometimes the actual keyboard can be intimidating, but the same movements in the air while I'm running laps in the neighborhood feels a little more free. I can't explain it. I don't know if it's working 100%, but I do think my typing is improving. And maybe it's just that, typing is something that is just going to take the longest. I don't really know. Maybe I wasn't ready the first couple of years. I do think I rely on talk to type a little too much sometimes. And again, that goes back to like, not so much to use it or lose it, but it's just like it's constantly assessing, and you have to weigh the pros and cons. Like it's, if a task that you feel is worth getting over the hump, and it used to take you a minute, but now it's taking you 2. Well, you can make some concessions there. 2 minutes today versus like a month from now, then it's only a minute. Yeah. But if you're doing some typing and it's like, well, I want to practice my typing, it's taking me 5 minutes today. It took me, it takes 10 minutes now, but next month it's only taking 5. Well, that's some improvement. So you're reassessing a month later. But if it's 10 minutes now and it's still taking 10 minutes next month, it's not something you should avoid, but it might be something to just, maybe it just adjusts on your list of where you want to go, But I do think this is a really important topic. I'd love to talk about it some more because I think this just surprises me in year 3 to be finding out these things that are, you can't keep up with everything. And I think, again, that speaks to why community is important, because there's collaboration, there's collectives, there are, cohorts, classes. Like, that is why survivor science, the community, is so important to me to get going here. Because just like raising children, they always say it takes a village, and it really takes a goddamn team, that's for sure. And I think that is no different in stroke. And I think the more we can share and collaborate amongst each other, whether you're a survivor, a caretaker, somebody who works in the field, I feel like, there's opportunity for a lot of crossover. And I just feel like the collaborative process for, everybody plays an important role. And the faster we can get the information to survivors and, feedback from survivors to clinicians, to researchers, I feel like it just, right now it's in a weird silo. To quote the guys from over at No Stroke, they talked about it. Everybody's in a silo, and I'd love to see everybody getting out of these silos and at least starting the collaboration. Because I feel like, it sounds corny, but together we go further. I mean, I really feel like that's true. And I feel like if I'm out here doing the most I can and I'm still finding it a struggle, that other people must be. And I can't imagine I'm alone in this. So, anyways, I hope you found this episode useful. I hope it leads to more discussion. I know I'm very keen to check out the Feldenkrais method and Daniel method. Would love to hear if you've checked them out, if you've had any experience with them. And again, if you are a fan of the podcast and you like what you're hearing, I would really appreciate if you go leave a review. You can go to the website and leave a review right there, and it goes to Apple and Spotify. And if you aren't signed up for the newsletter, the Survivor Science newsletter is available. You can see it on the podcast at lovablesurvivor.com over on the right-hand side. And there should be a link in the main menu as well. Get signed up for that. Hopefully starting here next week, actually, in May. We can start making that a regular thing. I don't know if it's going to be weekly or bi-weekly. Always confused by that. Some people go bi-weekly, some people go weekly. Really, the precipice is to be sharing some of this information that we talk about here and some other things and things that we talk about in next week, hopefully in episode 14, bring in a new segment where we start talking about something fun. Because I know these are getting a little heavy and I want to get back to the fun. So again, really appreciate it. Hope you're having a great week, and bye for now.